Okay, welcome back. Here's another book I've been reading. It's called If the Oceans Were Ink by Carla Power. It's, as it says, it's an unlikely friendship and a journey to the heart of the Quran. Obviously, plenty of Muslims on here, but many of you will, if for any that you don't know, the Quran is the central book and text of the Islamic faith. It's literally the words of God spoken through the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And it's funnily enough, it's as a Muslim myself, I've reading loads of other books, read loads of other books about Islam, but for a while haven't actually read the Quran. Again, the Quran can only be read in Arabic as the original Quran, but you can read translations of it. So this particular lady, journalist, secular journalist, decides to learn more about the Quran and Islam by spending a year taking interviews and studying the Quran for a year. So she does that, and she does it with a chap called Sheikh Muhammad Akram Nadwi. So she's a secular journalist and he's a kind of madrasa trained scholar. Very brilliant scholar though. He works at he works in Cambridge, but he is a madrasa trained scholar, originally from India. So she spends a year with him, learning about the Quran and Islam, obviously, and this takes place over a year in cafes and various other places, and Cambridge lecture theatres, at his home. She even goes back to his home in India, to his village, and she nearly goes to Saudi Arabia on a pilgrimage called the Umrah pilgrimage, which is a mini pilgrimage. So she nearly goes there. She doesn't make it there because of some visa issues, I think. But, that's the extent to which she goes. When I initially started reading it, I found it a bit slow going. I'm not quite sure why that was. I think it was probably something to do with me at the time. Maybe I had too many other things on. And so I put the book down for a while, and then I picked it up something like about 9 months later, and I decided to start reading it again, and suddenly I really enjoyed it. Now, the book that I read just before this was a book called Pimp, and this couldn't be more different in terms of the scholar. Sheikh Muhammad Akram Nadwi is somebody who's on a spiritual path. He respects women. He's married with 2 or 3 daughters, and it was a completely different book. So I don't know whether I enjoyed reading this after reading that. Maybe that has something to do with it. In terms of the way it's written, I found it very warm, very comfortable, very sort of fairly easy to read. And as I got halfway through it, it started to make me, I began to warm to both Carla Power and the Sheikh, in that their discussions started becoming, just more relaxed. They really approach topics that people want to know about. And it's not this is not a fact-filled book, so you can get that anywhere. It's not a history book. It's really a discussion that develops between 2 people from different worldviews over the course of a year. In a way, it's almost like a kind of buddy book, like you get these movies where these 2 cops come out and they're different, and then they get to have a kind of mutual respect. Carla, on the other hand, is a lady who grew up. She'd actually lived in Afghanistan and Iran for a while, and then she knows something about Islamic culture to start with, but it was more like from her childhood. But what she realized was she wanted to know more about the Quran. So this is a book where the 2 of them get to know each other, And before you're going to say no, they're both married, happily married, with their own kids and everything. So so there's nothing like that. But it's a very. I found it was a very interesting read. Like I said, very comfortable, very warm, very informative. There's really, they do sort of debate, and you kind of discover the messages of the Quran in terms of things, and in terms of things like gender, veiling, religious pluralism, tolerance, peace, violence, all that kind of thing. I mean, I wrote a couple of little things actually down, which I thought were you might want to know about. I mean, he talks, for example, the Sheikh talks about all the women scholars who have been kind of almost written out of history. And what happens is he starts off writing about some of these female scholars, and he thinks maybe he'll have about 10 or 15 of them. By the end of the book, it turns out that his work has taken him to about 300 or 400. So he has daughters of his own, so he's very much concerned about the role of women in Islamic societies, and he's very scathing about Islamic societies as well. And his point is that they don't follow the kind of messages of the Quran itself. There's a couple of strange, a bit controversial things about the book. He talks very much about compromise not as a weakness but as a strength, and he uses the example of the Palestinians in this book. And what he basically says is that if you're weak, you shouldn't necessarily be looking for justice. You should be looking for compromise. And he cites the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which is a treaty that the Prophet took part in at a certain time in his life. And he says that he thinks that this shows that this is actually something that this compromise eventually leads to greater strength later on. Something like kind of learning to fight another day or something like that along those lines. That I found a bit difficult because when I think about the Palestinians, I think that they have been unjustly treated. But so his views are kind of different. He thinks that they should stay away from. They should compromise much more than they do. So that was interesting and very different from what a lot of other people think. Another really interesting chapter, which I thought was quite powerful, was one called The Pharaoh and His Wife. And he talks about an Islam that's much more concerned with something called taqwa. Taqwa being God consciousness and the personal space of the heart. And he feels that this is what should be the main concern of Islam in the world today, as opposed to the politics and the outer space of the world. I thought that was interesting. He feels that politics divert Muslims away from taqwa, and they should really kind of stay away from any kind of state-imposed Sharia, which he puts it this way, that things that younger people are looking for in this kind of state Sharia imposed type of world is basically everything that the West has, but with a slightly Islamic twist. In other words, what he's saying is they have deep envy of the Western world, and they want what the West has, and that's what they're going to, which is kind of, and he argues that, and he says that basically politics is something Muslims, that Islam is not really about politics. We should stay away from it. It's more about affairs of the heart. So what can I say about that? Yeah, a lot of people will find that a controversial message, but it's like I said, it's a very warm, comfortable read. Initially, I found it difficult to get into, but really quite quickly, I found it. I enjoyed it, and I think it was probably a space that I was in when I started. Carla Powers, she's a Pulitzer. I think she's been a Pulitzer Prize nominee. She writes for various magazines, it's nicely written, and I definitely found you got to know the Islamic Sheikh, the Madrasa trained Sheikh Akram Nadwi a lot better. You know, she talks about his family and, you know, comes across like a good family. In Carla, you get to know a little bit more about Carla. You get to know a lot more about Carla and her background. And there is a kind of nice merging together at the end where there's a kind of mutual respect that develops. And, you know, it's not in a kind of patronizing way. It's quite a nice story. I could definitely, it's funny, I could see this being a movie of some kind, but it's, you know, I would definitely recommend it. This is If the Oceans Were Ink, by Carla Power, An Unlikely Friendship and a Journey to the Heart of the Quran. Okay, hope you enjoyed that one.